The dust of FOB Kestrel clung to everything, a fine, pale grit that coated tongues and settled in the mechanisms of rifles. It was into this world of beige and baked earth that Sergeant Anya Sharma arrived, her duffel bag slung over one shoulder, her black pelican case held firmly in her left hand. The air was a blast furnace, shimmering above the sun-scorched gravel of the landing zone. A young private, Rivas, jogged over, squinting against the glare. "Sergeant? Welcome to Kestrel. Let me get that for you," he said, gesturing towards the heavy case. "I've got it," Anya replied, her voice even, without inflection. Rivas hesitated, seeing the faint but persistent tremor in the hand clutching the handle. It wasn't a shiver from cold or a vibration from the nearby generators. It was a rhythmic, neurological flutter, a constant minute oscillation that made the knuckles of her hand seem to blur at the edges. He glanced from her hand to her face. She was older than most sergeants he saw rotating through, perhaps in her late 30s, with lines of fatigue etched around dark, unreadable eyes. Her black hair was pulled back in a severe, functional bun, and her expression was a mask of placid neutrality. "You sure, Sergeant? That thing looks heavy?" he pressed, his concern tinged with a flicker of something else. Curiosity, maybe pity. "I'm sure, Private," she said, the words polite but final. She shifted the weight of the case, the tremor momentarily more pronounced, and walked past him toward the processing tent. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of sweat and stale coffee. The clerk, a corporal named Chun, was hunched over a flickering monitor. He pushed a stack of digital forms toward her on a datapad. "Sign here, here, and here, Sergeant." Anya picked up the stylus. As she brought its tip to the screen, her hand's tremor became the sole focus of the room. The stylus danced a tiny, erratic pattern inches from the signature line. Chen's eyes widened slightly. He looked up at her, then quickly back down, a flush creeping up his neck. Anya took a slow, deliberate breath. She planted the heel of her hand firmly on the edge of the datapad, anchoring it. The tremor continued, but with her arm braced, she controlled the larger motion, signing her name in a script that was tight and jagged, but legible. Anya Sharma. She did it 3 times, each signature a small, silent battle. She pushed the datapad back. Chun took it without meeting her eyes. "Your billet is in the East Block. EOD workshop is adjacent. Staff Sergeant Davies is expecting you." He spoke quickly, eager to end the interaction. Anya gave a curt nod and hefted her case. As she walked out of the tent, she heard Rivas, who had followed her in, whisper to Chen, "Did you see her hand? How's she supposed to handle ordnance if she can't even sign her name straight?" Chen's reply was a low murmur, lost to the drone of a departing helicopter, but the sentiment was clear. The judgment had been passed before she had even unpacked her bag. Her reputation here at FOB Kestrel was already being written, and it was being defined by a single, uncontrollable twitch. She felt the familiar weight of it settle on her shoulders, heavier than her gear, more persistent than the desert dust. It was the price she paid. She just kept walking, her gaze fixed on the horizon, her trembling hand holding the tools of her trade. The EOD workshop was a climate-controlled bunker, a stark contrast to the oppressive heat outside. It smelled of ozone, solvent, and metallic precision. Tools hung from pegboards in perfect, gleaming rows. In the center of the room, Staff Sergeant Cole Davies was polishing the brass casing of a disarmed 122mm artillery shell, a trophy from a past success. He was a man carved from sharp angles and confidence, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "You must be Sharma," he said, not looking up from his work. He buffed a final, gleaming circle onto the brass before setting it down with a proprietary clink. He turned, his gaze immediately falling to her left hand, which was resting on the handle of her case. The tremor was there, a quiet but constant companion. Davies's smile tightened. "Heard you were coming. Didn't hear about the extra feature." He gestured vaguely with his polishing cloth. "Nerves? First time in the sandbox?" "No, Staff Sergeant. Anya said calmly. Right, he let the word hang in the air, freighted with disbelief. He walked around her, circling like a predator assessing unfamiliar prey. He was physically imposing, his uniform tailored to show off a gym-honed physique. Look, Sergeant. This isn't some rear-echelon parts depot. We're on the sharp end here. We deal with things that go boom. Things that require a steady hand. You understand what I'm saying? I understand my duties, Anya replied, her eyes meeting his. They were like still water, reflecting his condescension without a ripple. Her placid response seemed to irritate him more than any protest would have. Do you? He scoffed. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've got a date with Parkinson's. We don't have time to babysit. We need operators, not liabilities. Corporal Chun and Private Rivas had entered the workshop behind her, ostensibly to deliver supply requisitions, but their real purpose was obvious. They lingered by the door, watching the confrontation unfold. Davies was playing to his audience. I'm here to work, Anya said, her voice unwavering. Assign me a station. Davies laughed. A short, barking sound. A station? Right. You can start with inventory. There's a crate of outdated blasting caps in the secondary locker. Count them. Catalog them. And for God's sake, try not to drop any. It was a blatant dismissal. A task for a raw private, not a newly arrived NCO. It was designed to humiliate, to put her in her place. Chun shuffled his feet, looking uncomfortable. Rivas watched with wide, curious eyes. Just then, the workshop door opened again, and Colonel Madsen entered. He was the base commander, a man in his 50s with a face like a topographical map of hard decisions. His presence sucked the casual cruelty out of the air, replacing it with a rigid, formal tension. Staff Sergeant Davies, Madsen said, his voice gravelly. Report on the new arrival. Davies snapped to a parade rest stance. Sir, Sergeant Sharma has reported for duty. I was just getting her acquainted with our operational procedures. He chose his words carefully, but his glance towards Anya's hand was a clear signal. Colonel Madsen's gaze followed. He saw the tremor. His expression, already stern, hardened into something impenetrable. He looked at Anya, a long, assessing stare that felt like a physical weight. Sergeant, he began, your file says you have extensive experience. It also has a medical waiver in it thick enough to stop a bullet. Staff Sergeant Davies is my lead tech. His concerns are my concerns. This team operates on a foundation of absolute trust in each other's capabilities. There can be no weak links. I am not a weak link, sir, Anya stated. It was not a plea or a defense. It was a simple declaration of fact. The colonel's jaw tightened. He was a man who dealt in certainties, in quantifiable metrics of performance. Anya's trembling hand was a visible, undeniable flaw. Your record is impressive on paper, he conceded. But this is not paper. This is rock and sand and pressure plate IEDs. For now, you will assist Staff Sergeant Davies as he sees fit. You will be on a probationary period. Your first mistake will be your last on my base. Is that understood? Understood, Colonel, she said. Good. Madsen gave a final, sharp nod and swept out of the room. The moment he was gone, Davies's smirk returned. You heard the man, he said, tossing the polishing cloth onto a workbench. Probation. Don't screw it up. Now inventory. The caps are in the back. Get to it. Anya said nothing. She picked up her heavy Pelican case and carried it to an empty corner of the workshop. She didn't open it. She turned and walked toward the secondary locker Davies had indicated. The eyes of Chun, Rivas, and Davies followed her every step. They weren't just watching a new sergeant. They were watching a problem, a curiosity, a disaster waiting to happen. The air in the workshop was cold, sterile, and thick with the certainty of her failure. For 2 weeks, Anya existed in the background. She counted fuses, cataloged detonator wires, and reorganized the chemical stores. She performed every menial task assigned by Davies with a quiet, maddening efficiency. Her workspace was a small corner of the workshop, her personal tools remaining locked in their pelican case. She was a ghost in the unit, present but not participating. The team Davies, Chun, and Rivas went out on calls. They were a smooth, practiced unit, and Davies never missed an opportunity to highlight their successes in the daily briefings, often with a pointed look in Anya's direction. The mockery softened from overt insults to a kind of patronizing pity. Rivas would offer to carry things for her. Chun would double-check her inventory logs, assuming errors she never made. Davies simply ignored her, treating her like a piece of furniture, a silent testament to the Colonel's poor judgment. Anya absorbed it all with the same unshakable calm. She spoke only when necessary, her answers concise and direct. During downtime, while the others played cards or watched movies, she would sit with a complex technical manual, her trembling fingers tracing wiring diagrams, her focus absolute. Then came the call. It wasn't the usual report of a buried pressure plate or a roadside bomb. The radio squawked with a frantic, terrified voice from the local provincial governor's office in the nearby city of Al-Fahad. Code Black. I repeat, Code Black. It's the school. The Al-Kindi Primary School. They've put a bomb in the library. A chill went through the command post. The school. The enemy had crossed a line. Colonel Madsen's voice cut through the static on the command net. Davies, get your team moving. Now. Full tactical response. Roger that, Colonel. We're rolling. Davies's voice came back, tight with adrenaline. Anya stood from her corner, her manual forgotten. She watched the tactical feed on the main screen, a live drone view showing Davies's MRAP speeding through the dusty streets. They arrived at the school, a low-slung concrete building already surrounded by a panicked crowd being pushed back by local police. Davies's team made their entry. His helmet camera broadcast a jerky, tense view of the school's corridors, littered with abandoned book bags and shoes. They found it in the library. The room was small, lined with colorful children's drawings. In the center, on a reading table, sat the device. It was a monster. Even on the grainy video feed, its complexity was terrifying. It wasn't one bomb. It was a cluster. A central, military-grade artillery shell formed the core, but it was wired to a web of secondary devices. There were 3 large canisters, their labels stark and clear. Chlorine gas. A tangle of wires, red, blue, yellow, black, snaked between the components, connected to what looked like multiple trigger mechanisms. A digital timer on the main shell glowed with crimson numbers. 45:00. Hell, Davies muttered over the comms, his usual bravado gone, replaced by a grim tension. It's a daisy chain. Looks like a pressure plate under the table leg, a timer, and... God, is that a trembler switch? Can you handle it, Davies? Madsen's voice was strained. It's ugly, but it's doable, Davies replied, his confidence returning, albeit forced. The timer is the primary threat. I'll bypass the power to the detonator circuit first. Standard procedure. Rivas, maintain perimeter. Chun, monitor for any RF signals. Davies approached the device, his movements sure and practiced. He opened his kit and selected a pair of insulated cutters. Going for the primary power feed to the timer. It's the thick red one. Too obvious, maybe? No, they're arrogant. They want us to see it. He talked himself through it, a habit born of 100 successful disarmaments. He reached forward. The camera zoomed in on the wire. He positioned the cutters. Wait, Anya said, speaking for the first time. She was standing behind Colonel Madsen in the command post, her eyes fixed on the screen. Staff Sergeant, that's a feedback loop. Cutting it will trip the magnetic switch on the secondary. Davies froze. His voice came back, dripping with scorn. Stay off my comms, Sharma. I'm the lead tech here. I know what I'm doing. He ignored her warning. He believed in his own expertise, in the patterns he had seen 100 times before. This was just another puzzle box, and he was the master locksmith. Don't cut it. Anya's voice was sharper now, urgent. But it was too late. Davies squeezed the handles of the cutters. There was a sharp crackle, a flash of white light on the screen, and then a violent jolt. It wasn't the main explosion. It was one of the smaller secondary charges. The helmet camera spun wildly and then crashed to the floor, its view now fixed on the ceiling tiles cracked and askew. Shouts and screams echoed over the comms. "Davies is down. He's hit," Rivas yelled. "Medic! We need a medic!" Through the chaos, another sound emerged, high-pitched and menacing. A new beeping, faster and more frantic than before. On a secondary camera feed from the hallway, they saw the timer on the main shell. The numbers were no longer counting down. They were flashing, and the time had dropped from over 40 minutes to 1500 hours. "What's happening?" Madsen demanded. Chen's voice was panicked. "Sir, cutting that wire didn't disable the timer, it activated an accelerator. The secondary charge also ruptured the casing on one of the chlorine tanks. It's not leaking yet, but the seal is compromised. The whole thing is unstable." The screen showed two soldiers dragging a bleeding and disoriented Davies out of the library. His arm was mangled, and his face was pale with shock and fury. The bomb, now more dangerous than ever, sat alone in the silent room, its timer dropping with sickening speed. 14:30. 14:29. Colonel Madsen stood rigid, his face a mask of cold dread. He had sent his best man, and his best man had not only failed but had made the situation catastrophically worse. The school, the children's drawings on the walls, the compromised chemical agent. It was a nightmare scenario. He looked around the command post, at the pale faces of the analysts and officers. No one had a solution. Their only other EOD specialist was on leave. They were out of options. His eyes fell on Anya Sharma. She was still standing there, her expression as calm and unreadable as ever. Her left hand trembled by her side, a stark, mocking contrast to the utter stillness of her posture. Desperation was a powerful acid, capable of dissolving pride and prejudice in an instant. "Sergeant Sharma," Madsen said, his voice raspy. He didn't have to give the order. He just looked at her. Anya met his gaze. The years of doubt, the weeks of humiliation at Kestrel, the constant battle with her own body. None of it was in her eyes. There was only a quiet, profound sense of purpose. "I'm on my way," she said. The walk to the bomb suit felt like moving through water. Each piece of equipment Anya donned was a familiar weight, a ritual she had performed more times than she could count. The heavy trousers, the thick Kevlar chest plate, the suffocating helmet with its small, reinforced visor. As she sealed the helmet, the world went quiet, reduced to the sound of her own breathing and the sterile hiss of the comms link in her ear. Rivas, his face pale and streaked with dust, helped her with the final seals. He avoided her eyes, his hands fumbling slightly. The bravado was gone, replaced by a raw, naked fear. "Good luck, Sergeant," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. Anya just nodded and began the long walk. The school corridor was a gauntlet of silence. The frantic energy of the initial response had evaporated, leaving behind a heavy, waiting stillness. She passed the spot where Davies had fallen, a dark smear on the tiled floor. Her steps were deliberate, measured. Inside the suit, she was sweating, the recycled air thick and hot. She entered the library. The bomb sat on the table like a malevolent idol in a desecrated temple. The beeping was louder now, a frantic, digital heartbeat counting down the seconds to oblivion. 12:47. 12:46. The ruptured chlorine canister was visible, a hairline fracture weeping a faint, oily vapor that shimmered in the light. In the command post, every screen was fixed on her helmet feed. The image was steady, centered on the device. Colonel Madsen leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of a console. Davies, patched up and sitting in a corner with his arm in a sling, watched with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "She's going to get us all killed," he muttered to no one in particular. Anya knelt. The suit creaked, a sound like bending metal. She placed her personal Pelican case on the floor beside her and opened it. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was a set of tools unlike the standard military issue. They were sleeker, more specialized. Some looked like surgical instruments, others like alien artifacts of polished steel and ceramic. Her left hand, gloved and bulky, trembled as she reached for her first tool, a fiber optic scope. The tremor was visible on the monitor, a jarring, uncontrolled motion that made everyone in the command post hold their breath. "See," Davies hissed. "She can't even hold a scope steady." But Anya didn't fight the tremor. She waited. Her breathing was a slow, controlled rhythm. Inhale, exhale. The shaking hand moved. Then, for a microsecond, as her muscles found a fleeting point of equilibrium, it paused. In that sliver of an instant, she guided the scope into a small opening in the bomb's casing. The tremor resumed immediately, but the scope was in. On a secondary screen, an image appeared, the bomb's inner workings. It was worse than they thought. Davies had been right about the daisy chain, but he had missed the nuance. The wire he had cut was part of a binary trigger. It didn't just accelerate the timer. It also armed a secondary power source, a chemical battery that was now slowly heating up, preparing to bypass the timer entirely if it was tampered with again. "My God," Chen whispered. "It's a logic bomb. Every action has an opposite and equally deadly reaction." Anya's voice came over the comms, preternaturally calm. "The primary detonator is linked to the timer, but the chemical dispersal is tied to the trembler switch and the new chemical battery. Two separate problems. I'll deal with the chemical threat first." She set down the scope. Her hand shook as she selected her next tool. A long, thin syringe and a small, refrigerated vial from her kit. She was going to inject a cryogenic agent to freeze the chemical battery, slowing the reaction and disabling the trembler switch, which was heat-sensitive. But the injection port was minuscule, no bigger than a pinhead, and it was located directly beside a mercury switch, a tiny glass bulb containing a bead of liquid metal. If she jostled the device even slightly, the mercury would complete a circuit, and the chlorine canisters would detonate instantly. The helmet camera zoomed in. The view filled the main screen in the command post. They saw the tip of the needle, held in her trembling glove. It danced a chaotic, terrifying pattern around the injection port. It was impossible. A surgeon couldn't make that shot, let alone someone with a visible neurological tremor, encased in a clumsy bomb suit. "No, no, no," Rivas breathed, watching from the hallway monitor. "Abort, Sergeant. Abort. Silence on the comms," Matson commanded, his voice like iron. Anya's breathing remained steady. 1, 2, 3. She wasn't aiming in the conventional sense. She was anticipating the rhythm of her own body, the pattern of the tremor she had lived with for years. It was not a weakness to be overcome. It was a variable to be factored into the equation. She knew its cadence better than her own heartbeat. Her hand moved. The needle swayed wildly. Then, for a fraction of a second, the tremor reached its apex, and in the instant of reversal, her hand was perfectly still. In that moment, she plunged the needle forward. It slid home, perfectly into the port. A collective, audible gasp went through the command post. Davies sat bolt upright, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. Anya depressed the plunger, injecting the cryogenic fluid. A fine layer of frost instantly bloomed across the surface of the chemical battery. On a diagnostic monitor, a temperature graph plummeted. The green light next to the trembler switch flickered and died. One threat was neutralized. The timer continued its relentless countdown. 8:14. 8:13. Back in the command post, Colonel Matson was staring at the screen, but his mind was racing elsewhere. The precision of that movement was not luck. It was something else, something practiced, something learned. "Chun," he ordered, his voice low and urgent. "Pull up Sergeant Sharma's full service record. I want everything. Unredact it. Use my command override. Now." Chen's fingers flew across his keyboard. "Sir, most of it is classified above my level." "I said use my override, Corporal," Matson snapped. The screen in front of Chun flickered as security protocols were bypassed. A wall of text appeared. Mission reports from places that were officially designated as peaceful. Commendations so heavily redacted they were almost unreadable. And a call sign, appearing over and over. "Spectre." An older intelligence officer standing near Madsen, a major who rarely spoke, went pale. "Spectre," he whispered, his voice full of awe. "Sir, Spectre isn't a person. It's a legend, the ghost of the Anbar province. They said Spectre defused the Trinity device." "The Trinity device?" Madsen asked, his eyes locked on the file. "The one with the 3 synchronized barometric triggers in the hospital." "The same," the major said. "No one ever saw the tech, just the results. They'd go in alone, no support, and succeed where entire teams had failed. I thought it was just a story they told to scare rookies." Chun was scrolling frantically. "Sir, I've got an after-action report here. Operation Nightfall, Kandahar Province. An IED in a marketplace. Spectre was on site. There was a secondary blast. A shaped charge. The report says, Spectre shielded 2 children from the blast wave with their own body." He paused, his voice dropping. "Medical addendum. Severe trauma to the upper torso and left shoulder. Extensive nerve damage to the brachial plexus. The tremor. Sir, the tremor isn't a weakness. It's a scar." In the library, Anya was moving to the next phase. The main timer. Now that the chemical threat was contained, she could address the primary explosive. The wiring was a nightmare, intentionally misleading. Davies had fallen for the most obvious trap. The real power source was routed through a complex logic board hidden beneath a magnetically sealed plate. Prying it off would break the circuit and trigger the detonator. Cutting any more wires would do the same. She had to bypass the entire board. Her hands, still trembling, selected a delicate-looking tool from her case. It was a custom-made device with 2 hair-thin probes and a small microprocessor attached. She had built it herself. It was designed to create a temporary bridge, supplying continuous power to the detonation circuit while she physically removed the main battery. The timer read 4:32. She had to attach the probes to 2 microscopic contact points on the logic board. The helmet camera zoomed in so close that the individual solder points looked like silver mountains. Her trembling hand moved the first probe into position. It skittered across the surface of the board, dangerously close to other components. "Steady, steady," Chun murmured at his console, as if he could will it through the screen. Anya's breathing was the only sound on the comms. "Inhale." The tremor moved the probe left. "Exhale." It moved right. She wasn't fighting it. She was guiding it, letting the oscillations cancel each other out until, for a breathtaking instant, the probe hovered directly over the contact point. She pressed down. A tiny clamp deployed, locking it in place. 1 down. The timer clicked past the 3-minute mark. 2:59. 2:58. She began to position the second probe. This one was harder. The contact point was partially obscured by a capacitor. She had to approach it from an awkward angle. The bulky glove of the bomb suit made the movement clumsy. The probe shook, the motion magnified on the command post's main screen. It looked like a miniature earthquake. Davies was on his feet now, his face ashen. The arrogance had been burned out of him, replaced by a horrifying understanding. He wasn't just watching a bomb disposal. He was watching a master at work, a master he had mocked and belittled. He was watching the ghost of Anbar, the legend from Kandahar, and she was fighting for their lives with a body that had already paid the price for heroism. Anya angled the probe. Her arm was braced against the edge of the table. She was using her entire body as a dampening system, channeling the tremor away from the delicate tip. The seconds bled away. 1:45. 1:44. The probe hovered, shaking. Anya exhaled slowly. The tip dipped, touched the contact point, and clamped on. The small screen on her custom tool lit up. Green light. The bridge was active. The detonation circuit now had an independent power source. Now for the hard part. She had to remove the main battery without causing any voltage fluctuations. She selected a pair of non-conductive ceramic pliers. Her grip was sure, despite the constant flutter of her fingers. The timer showed 1:03, 1:02. She gripped the edge of the battery pack. It was wedged in tight, She had to pull it straight out, smoothly and evenly. Any twisting motion could cause a short. 050. She pulled. The battery resisted. She applied more pressure, her shoulders tensing under the weight of the bomb suit. Her entire arm was shaking now, the tremor amplified by strain. In the command post, the intelligence major was reading from the file in a hushed, reverent tone. After the incident, Spectre refused a medical discharge, filed for a waiver, passed every physical and psychological evaluation, arguing that the tremor was predictable and could be accounted for in operational procedure. The board denied it, but General McCreary, the SOCOM commander at the time, overruled them. His only note on the file says, "A warrior's scars are not weaknesses. They are a testament to the battles they have won." She was reassigned to a training and advisory role. This must be her first active deployment since 030. The battery began to slide. Anya pulled with steady, relentless force. The movement was agonizingly slow. 021. The camera showed her knuckles white inside the glove. The muscles in her forearm were rigid cords. 015. The battery came free. She pulled it clear of the housing. For a moment, nothing happened. The timer on the bomb was still counting down. 011. 010. The bridge she had created was powering the detonator, and the timer was still part of that circuit. "It's still active," Chin shouted. "The timer is still going." Anya didn't panic. This was the final step. She reached for a pair of simple wire cutters. There was one wire left that mattered. The wire connecting the timer to the logic board she had just bypassed. With the main battery gone and her bridge in place, this wire was now isolated, redundant. Cutting it would do nothing to the detonation circuit itself, but it would kill the display. It was the final, definitive act. 009. 008. Her hand, holding the cutters, trembled violently. It was the most pronounced the tremor had been. The strain of the last few minutes had pushed her damaged nerves to their limit. 007. The cutters hovered over the wire. 006. She took a breath. 005. The tremor paused. Snip. The red numbers on the timer froze at 004. Then the display went black. Silence. A profound, absolute silence filled the library, the corridor, the command post. The frantic beeping was gone. All that remained was the quiet hiss of Anya's respirator. For a full 10 seconds, no one moved. No one spoke. No one breathed. The world had stopped turning. Anya stayed kneeling for a long moment, her head bowed slightly. Then, with methodical slowness, she began to back away from the table. She didn't look back at the inert device. Her work there was done. Colonel Madsen's voice cracked through the silence on the comms, thick with an emotion he couldn't hide. "Sergeant. Status." Anya's voice came back, as calm and even as it had been from the very beginning. "Device is neutralized, Colonel. The library is secure. The area is safe." She rose to her feet, the bomb suit groaning under the movement. She turned and walked out of the library. In the hallway, Rivas and 2 other soldiers from the security team were flattened against the wall, their weapons lowered. As she approached, they stared at her. Their faces a mixture of terror, relief, and a dawning, overwhelming awe. They were no longer looking at her trembling hands or her gender or her age. They were looking at the person who had just walked into the heart of the inferno and extinguished the flame. Rivas, his mouth hanging slightly open, seemed to shrink back as she passed, as if in the presence of something holy and terrifying. The walk back to the staging area was a blur. Medics and support staff parted before her like water. When she reached the designated safe zone, she stopped. Hands, blessedly steady for a moment, reached up and unsealed her helmet. She pulled it off, and the cool, dusty air hit her face. Sweat plastered her hair to her temples and dripped from her chin. The world rushed back in, loud and chaotic. And there, waiting for her, was Staff Sergeant Davies. His left arm was in a clean white sling, his face pale beneath his usual tan. The smugness, the arrogance, the casual cruelty, It was all gone, stripped away, leaving behind something raw and humbled. He looked at her, at the exhaustion etched on her face, at the faint but persistent tremor that had already returned to her hand as she held the heavy helmet. He struggled to his feet, hissing in pain as he put weight on his injured side. He stood before her, the man who had called her a liability, the expert who had almost gotten them all killed. He didn't speak. Words were useless now, hollow and insufficient. Instead, he brought his good hand up in a salute. It wasn't the lazy, informal gesture of a peer. It was a sharp, formal, parade ground salute. A salute of profound and undeniable respect. A salute from a subordinate to a master. Anya Sharma looked at him, her dark eyes holding his for a long moment. She saw the shame, the gratitude, the awe. She gave him a single, brief nod. It was all the acknowledgement he needed, and all she was willing to give. Then she turned and walked toward the debriefing tent, leaving him standing there, holding his salute until she was out of sight. The silent, symbolic transfer of power was complete. The mockery had ended. Respect had been earned. Hours later, the adrenaline had faded, leaving behind the bone-deep weariness of a battle won. FOB Kestrel was settling into the quiet rhythms of the night. The debriefing had been a short, sterile affair. Colonel Madsen had simply looked at Anya and said, "Thank you, Sergeant." That's all. No one else spoke. No one needed to. The atmosphere in the room was charged with a new understanding. Now, Anya was alone in her sanctuary, the EOD workshop. The air was cool and smelled of oil and metal. It was a place of order, of logic, of things that could be understood and controlled. She had her Pelican case open on her workbench, its contents laid out on a clean, soft cloth. One by one, she was cleaning her tools. The fiber optic scope, the cryogenic injector, the custom-built bridging tool, the ceramic pliers. The work was a ritual, a meditation. Her left hand, free of the bulky glove, trembled as she wiped down the polished steel of a probe. She didn't fight it. She worked with it, her right hand steadying the tool while her left moved the cloth. She had long ago made peace with this ghost in her own machine. It was a part of her, a physical reminder of the lives she had saved and the price she had paid for them. It was the metronome for the deadly rhythm of her work. The door to the workshop slid open with a soft hiss, breaking her solitude. She didn't look up, already knowing who it was. Staff Sergeant Cole Davies stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light of the corridor. He was out of his sling, his arm now wrapped in a complex bandage. He hesitated for a moment, as if unsure of his right to enter this space. Finally, he stepped inside. He didn't speak. The time for his brand of easy, confident words was long past. He walked over to her workbench, his steps quiet on the concrete floor. He stopped beside her, looking down at the array of specialized tools. They were far beyond anything in the standard-issue kits he had always taken such pride in. They were the instruments of a true artist. He reached into the pocket of his fatigues and pulled out a small, heavy object wrapped in oilcloth. He placed it gently on the corner of her workbench, next to her set of drivers. He didn't say what it was. He didn't have to. Anya paused her cleaning and looked at the object. She knew without unwrapping it. It was a dampener, a custom-machined counterweight, perfectly balanced and calibrated, designed to attach to the handle of her primary multi-tool. It wouldn't stop the tremor, but it would absorb the worst of the oscillations, making fine work just a little bit easier. It was a piece of high-tolerance machining that would have taken an expert hours, if not days, to craft. It was an apology, a tribute, and an offering, all rendered in a small block of tungsten steel. Davies met her eyes for a second, his own gaze full of a respect that bordered on reverence. He gave her a short, stiff nod, the same way she had nodded to him hours earlier. Then he turned and walked out, leaving her alone once more. Anya looked at the gift, then back at her own trembling hand. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of her lips. She didn't pick up the dampener. Not yet. Instead, she picked up a fresh cloth and the pair of wire cutters she had used to save them all. The ones that had snipped the wire at 004. She began to wipe them down, her movements slow and deliberate, the tremor a constant, familiar presence in the quiet hum of the workshop. Outside, the first hint of dawn was beginning to break over the distant mountains, chasing away the deep purple of the desert night. The horizon was a thin, incandescent line of orange and gold. A new day was coming to FOB Kestrel. For now, her work was done.